Hello, everybody, and welcome to my spoiler review for Superman. And if the title didn't say it already, this is going to go into full spoilers for the movie. So if you haven't seen it yet, you should go watch it and then come back and watch this review. If you want to see what I thought of the movie, then you can go watch my non-spoiler review, which I uploaded earlier this week. And it's been a really interesting week as far as seeing the reaction to that review. I said even before the movie came out that I sensed that I would probably be in the minority on that, and it seems like I am. I would say the vast majority of people that disagreed were on the lines of I respectfully disagree with you. I see where you're coming from, but I still enjoyed the movie, or I don't really get where you're coming from and I enjoyed the movie. That's totally fine. A very small portion of people saying this guy's an idiot and nobody should ever listen to him say anything again. But honestly, I knew that that was going to be the case if I'd liked the movie or if I'd not liked the movie. This was one of those movies critically that I think was kind of a no-win scenario for a lot of movie critics. I think that I would have been called a shill instead of a hater if I'd liked the movie. That just kind of was the feeling around the film before it came out. The only thing that kind of chafed me the wrong way is if you used to watch movie fights, you know that when I was fighting on the show, I would get upset if somebody would put words in my mouth and say that I made an argument that I didn't make. And I did see a fair amount of that, of people saying like, oh, well, all you want is another origin story. You said you wanted another origin story. We don't need another Superman origin story. And I didn't actually say that. I kind of specifically said I don't need another Superman origin story. What I said was I felt like we needed some more of the fundamentals for these versions of the characters to be established in the film. But I didn't think that there should be another complete origin story. And so that's part of what this spoiler review is. I'm going to go into my thoughts on the movie a little more deeply. I can actually talk about some of the plot points that I couldn't talk about or really even reference in my non-spoiler review, and go into a little bit more of my thinking as far as where I think the movie lacks some stuff for me. I went and saw it again. I saw it a second time, and there were a couple of things, a couple of points that I made in my non-spoiler review where I was wrong. And so I'm going to talk about that and some of the other things that I noticed in this second viewing. And as always with the review, with my review, or really any movie review worth its salt, this is just me explaining my feelings. This is not me telling you that you're wrong for feeling the way that you do. And seeing it a second time, I would say my feelings about the movie didn't change substantially. My rating, which I kind of do on a spectrum, was just barely into what I call not a fan territory. If anything, it maybe would inch just a little bit into at least closer to it's fine territory. But I felt about the same about the film. Like I said, there were only a couple things that were clarified for me or that hit a little bit different. And that's why I like having the opportunity to do things like spoiler reviews, why I like to do these deep dives here on the channel, because it allows me to get past the rating, past the number or whatever else, and really dive into my feelings on specific points in the movie. So let's start with something that I think I actually got wrong in my non-spoiler review, and several people called me out on it, and they were right to do so. I said in that review that I didn't feel like Lois Lane was of much consequence past Act 1 of the movie. And in rewatching the movie again, I was off base on that. And I think that part of it was just that I was collecting a lot of different thoughts. I was looking back on a lot of different things about the film. And her role in the second and third act of the movie just kind of got lost in the shuffle for me. I think it's partially because what she's doing in Act 2 and Act 3 are sort of working with people like Mr. Terrific and, even Jimmy, who gets the critical information so that they can break the story in the Daily Planet. He's gathering that information. But Lois is a key element in those events. She takes Superman back to his parents in Smallville. She dictates the story once all of the information is gathered, and she's able to notice those patterns from Jimmy. And that was stuff that, when I was putting my non-spoiler together, it just didn't fire in my brain. I underestimated the role that she played. And so that's another reason why I'm glad I can go back and do these spoiler reviews. Occasionally, I will get something wrong. And so with Rachel Brosnahan and her role in the film, I didn't give her enough credit, and I didn't give that character enough credit. And I'm fine with admitting that was something that I definitely got wrong in my first review. I also want to talk a little bit more about David Cornsweet. I think that he was a really good Superman. He hit the character beats that were asked of him. He had that optimistic and wholesome side. I bought him as Superman immediately. I do wish that we had seen more of him as Clark Kent. I mean, James Gunn has said that he obviously wants to move us as an audience past the point where we've been in other Superman movies. But personally, I've always enjoyed that duality of performance. I was looking forward to seeing David Cornsweet and how he kind of did that Earth persona as Clark Kent, but we just basically get that one scene in the newsroom. Maybe we'll have more of the Clark Superman duality in the sequel, but overall, I think that Cornsweet did really well. And looking back on the post Christopher Reeve Superman actors, I've never really had beef with any of them. Brandon Routh, Henry Cavill, David Cornsweet. I think that they have all done well in the role. They've done well with what was asked of them, and any issues that I might have had were really issues that were about the creative choices surrounding them, not their performances in the movie. I think that Warner Brothers over the years has actually done a very good job of casting actors to play Superman. I also really like the scene with Clark and his dad in Smallville. We'll get to the whole Jor-El reveal later, but the question that drove that scene, the idea of Superman being conflicted because he believes that he is doing what he does because that's what his purpose was, and Jonathan Kent saying, no, you're the hero you are because of the choices you make, not because you've been given a purpose by somebody else. That's what I think should have been more at the core of the movie instead of just one element of it. And I think that Pruitt Taylor Vince was really great in the role as Pa Kent. I think that Neva Howe was good as Martha Kent. I like the idea that the Kents in this movie were lower to middle class. They were very unremarkable, unassuming people. They seemed like a real rural family instead of just being, some old white-haired people in a farmhouse somewhere. I've met a lot of people like the Kents here in Arkansas. They felt very real. And just generally, I think that James Gunn got the spirit of the character of Superman right. And there are several moments that are great Superman moments. I think that the flying sequences looked great. The iconography of the character was really well done. The scene where Superman catches the building as the lady's trying to escape in her car, and she looks back and she sees Superman hovering in the air with the dust in the air, kind of backlit by the sun. I think that that is an all-timer Superman moment. And I think that James Gunn gets Superman and wants to tell a story in that more traditional vein, while still giving us a Superman that I think was very anguished in many ways, that still showed anger. I think maybe it almost went a little bit too much in that direction, but that's another thing in my non-spoiler review. I think watching it again, there was a little bit more of that hopeful Superman in there than I thought the first time when I saw the movie. It's much more of a balance. And so I think that this was a successful way of giving audiences a Superman that sort of meets that expectation of the character, but also not making him so one-dimensional that he seems like kind of the boring Boy Scout. I've often said that Superman is a very easy character to make boring, because if you just go all good and all wholesome, then there's not a whole lot there. Marvel did it very well with Captain America, giving him conflict, and I think that James Gunn did a pretty good job with Superman, giving him conflict. My issues with this movie aside, I am looking forward to seeing more of this version of Superman. And when I sort of was able to watch the movie again and dive down deeper into how I felt, I think that one reason that I was less on board with this particular movie, maybe less on board with most, is that I seem to have some issues with James Gunn's style in general. I've really liked some of his movies. The first Guardians movie especially, I thought was a really, really good movie. But there were some other movies that I didn't enjoy as much. If you'll remember a couple years ago, I was a lot less high on Guardians 3 than most people. It was actually a similar situation to this one, where I came out early and said, yeah, I'm not so sure about this one. And then it came out and people said, oh, I loved it. What are you talking about? You're crazy. That's actually maybe the most analogous movie to Superman as far as reaction to what I thought prior to this one being released. I think that James Gunn is great at character. I think he's great at iconography, but I think that he struggles, at least for me, with tone, and particularly when it comes to humor. Now, that's not to say that I don't think movies should be funny or that a movie can't juggle different tones. Gunn himself, I think, has been able to do that successfully in the past. I just think that he was clumsy in some places with this movie and how he did it. For example, we have that opening scene where Superman lands in the middle of Antarctica. He's bleeding in the snow. He's gravely injured. It's a really compelling way to open a movie, but we go from that sort of dire situation to immediately after he's healed, we get jokes about crypto damaging the Fortress of Solitude. There's that intense, very intense scene where Lex Luthor just cold-bloodedly shoots a man in the head, and we have Superman wailing in agony. And then straight from that, we go to a super stylized fight scene with Mr. Terrific that's set to pop music. Even that key scene between Lois and Superman, where they sort of have that big talk and make up, behind them, there's a big visual joke playing in the background throughout. I mean, it makes for a nice visual at the end of the scene, but it also undercut for me the content of that scene. A lot of people don't bump up against those rapid changes in tone, but that always gives me a little bit of whiplash as a viewer. You can have all of those different things in the movie, but I think that you have to balance them very carefully. And I don't think that James Gunn does, but I think that that's also intentional on his part. I think that he enjoys kind of keeping audiences off balance, but for me, it'll throw me off balance and I never quite recover that balance. And I think that might be why I'm a little bit more down on many of James Gunn's movies. Looking back on the movie and watching it a second time as well, I think there's another thing that's completely a matter of personal taste that maybe held me back from enjoying it as much as many other people do, which is that even when I was reading comic books before any of these superhero movies were released, I was never really drawn that much to the cosmic side of things. Even stuff like the Fantastic Four, the Jack Kirby kind of stuff. A lot of times if it goes too far into the cosmic, I lose that grounding with reality that I need a little bit in enjoying a film. And it just kind of spins out for me. So the idea of Superman being in a pocket universe and him saving an alien baby and an anti-proton stream, that in general was just kind of a bit too out there for me. And because it takes up so much screen time, I think it also dragged my opinion of the whole film down because there was a whole big sequence in it that I just really wasn't on board with. For a lot of people, though, that's their favorite kind of stuff. And it's obviously stuff that James Gunn loves as well. And it's why I frame this not necessarily as a right-wrong thing, but very much as a personal taste thing. I do want to talk about a plot point, though, that I think deserved more screen time, and that is the twist of the film regarding Jor-El and Laura sending Superman to Earth to rule and dominate, not to look over humanity. I actually don't mind that change to the norm. I think that it was an interesting wrinkle in this version of Superman's story, especially following up on the Zack Snyder version of the Superman universe, where Jor-El was so critical in Superman's development. And it poses an interesting question that I think the movie half answers. The bases are covered from Superman's end as far as his real purpose and what drives him and motivates him to be a hero. That scene with Jonathan Kent is great. And I like that you bookend the movie with Superman watching the message from his Kryptonian parents because it comforts him at the beginning, and then watching his home videos with the Kents at the end. I mean, that is a classic story arc. But the side I think the movie needed to cover a little bit more is from humanity's point of view, because the news breaks, Luthor gets this message that Superman was sent here to rule over and dominate Earth, and everybody turns against Superman. And that is interesting. I like that path, but the only real resolution to that is at the end, after Superman saves the day, where we have a newscaster basically saying, actually, you know what, Lex Luthor's really bad, and Superman is great. But that doesn't change the fact that this wasn't a manufactured message. That message was very real. So yes, Superman saved the day at the end of the movie, but that fundamental question, I would think with a lot of people, would still linger in the air. I would think that there would still be some doubt about Superman's intentions. I don't know if they plan to pursue that in a sequel, but it seemed to me like they kind of closed the loop on that in this movie. And I think that it could have been dealt with in a couple of different ways that would have made it just a little bit more narratively satisfying, and I think really tied the movie much more to Superman. Number one, I think that a scene where Superman addressed humanity directly could have gone a long way. Christopher Reeve was great at those kinds of scenes, and I think that David Cornsweet would have been really great at it too. I think that if he had been able to share with the people of Earth the conclusion that he came to with the help of his Earth dad, on top of saving the day, then it might have gone a long way toward making that story more satisfying. And I also think that Superman should have had a direct role in resolving the conflict between Baravia and Jaranpur. I know the movie set up that he could only choose one thing to do. He could intervene or he could go save Metropolis. And of course, he wound up going to save Metropolis. But I think if the story could have been structured so that he could race from Metropolis and intervene just in time in front of the world, that also could have worked as a way to show people that he is a force for absolute good. And we could have seen a direct interaction between Superman and that little boy with the Superman flag, which is one of my favorite visuals of this entire movie. That and him shielding the little girl. I mean, they were both in the trailer for a reason. I think those two images really speak to the absolute good that Superman is, and seeing him interact directly with that character, I think could have resolved that narrative very nicely, especially because the movie starts in context of that conflict. Now, I know that the movie uses Superman having to choose between stopping the war and saving Metropolis as a way to get the Justice Gang involved and have them more allied with Superman and his mission of saving lives everywhere. But I think involving them more in the conclusion of the story undercuts some of the opportunities to build up Superman. And I think that you could have just sent them to take down the leader, which we do see. We see that with Hawk Girl. A lot of people thought I was saying Hot Girl. I know it's Hawk Girl, but it's kind of hard to when you blur those things together. It sounds like Hot Girl. You see that with Hawk Girl taking down the leader. I think that you could have sent the entire Justice Gang to do that, fighting off the forces maybe that were outside of the palace, and left the war itself to Superman. And I think it's probably the biggest instance where the Justice Gang, for me, took away from the focus of the movie. I would say a lesser instance would be when Superman was fighting the big fire monster, because I think that was an opportunity to see Superman at full power, not just fighting to a draw and having what would turn out to be Ultraman retreating from the scene, but that could have been a pure scene of Superman heroism in the same vein as the plane rescue scene from Superman Returns. So we get to see the ultimate good that Superman can do, which directly leads into his downfall. Instead, we have the Justice Gang intervening, and they then join in on the fight, and Superman just kind of becomes a spectator, really. He's saving a squirrel and talking about how they shouldn't have killed the monster. But if that could have just been a showcase for Superman, again, I think that he would have felt more like a factor in his own movie. And I know that both of these suggestions would be reducing the role of the Justice Gang, but I also believe that they played a bit too prominent of a role in this movie. I wish that we had focused on Superman a bit more. And also, just a side note, James Gunn really loves causing trauma to eyes of big kaiju type monsters in his superhero movies for some reason, because we saw it in the Suicide Squad and then we saw it again in this movie. Not really a criticism there, just an observation. James Gunn loves to punch eyeballs. So let's talk a bit about Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor. Many people are really enjoying his take on the part, and I thought that he was great in some parts of the movies. Other parts didn't work as much for me, but I think it mostly comes down to the writing. I like that he went big with the character. Not big in a sort of Jesse Eisenberg way where you're like, what is this guy doing? But like over the top evil, really kind of scenery chewing, but in a way that mostly works. There were a few instances where the accent felt a bit like the House MD Hugh Laurie sort of I am a British guy playing an American. But really the bigger thing to me, and that was only in a few places, I thought that Lex was one of the characters who felt less developed to me because he talked a lot about hating Superman, but I felt like it was more tell than show. The movie, I don't think, really slowed down enough to get me on board with it. And for me, I think if you had taken that scene where Superman goes to Luthor Corp and confronts him directly and had that be just a bit more involved, that could have bolstered that relationship a lot. I understand that they have a history. I understand that most people say, well, everybody knows that Lex Luthor hates Superman. We don't need to know, why, or he says why in this speech or in this line of dialogue. But I felt like you needed a little bit more of that direct relationship. And it works as is for a lot of people. But for me, it's more than just writing some lines of dialogue that are literally like, this is why I hate Superman. I needed a bit more of an interplay between those two. And again, I think because the movie was trying to do so many different things, including the war plot line and the Justice Gang and everything else, we lost some of the core scenes between Lex and Superman, even one longer core scene that I think could have bolstered that relationship even more. And you could still have Superman intervene in the war at the end of the movie. I think that could have happened independent of Lex and still been a storyline. Maybe they're just an aggressive country. I mean, we certainly have seen that play out in real life over the last few years. And I had similar feelings with the Clark and Lois relationship. I got some pushback on that, again, saying we don't need to see them fall in love for the first time, which I don't think necessarily we do, but they were immediately at odds with each other almost as soon as we met them. And I feel like the landing into that could have been softer. Maybe a scene between the two of them at the Daily Planet that leads right into that cooking breakfast for dinner scene, where you're perhaps playing off the audience expectation that Lois doesn't know that Clark Kent is Superman, and then you reveal in that scene that, oh, no, actually she does. We're picking them up in their relationship much later than we're used to. They do interact in that newsroom scene where they kind of go back and forth about Superman, but that's in the presence of Jimmy and everybody else. What I'm talking about is just one sort of one-on-one scene, maybe a stolen moment between just the two of them. So we get kind of a baseline for this Lois and this Superman before that Norm is upset in the next scene. Rachel Brosnahan and David Corenswet had really good chemistry, and where they end up I thought was great. I love that visual of Lois and Superman flying up at the end. Again, that's a great Lois and Superman moment. That's going to go on the highlight reel whenever people cut together clips from different Superman movies. But I think that that's largely what I mean, and I think what people misunderstood about my non-spoiler review is I'm not saying I need to see Clark Kent and Lois Lane meet for the first time. I need you to retell that story. I'm saying that I needed a little bit more of an introduction to this version of these characters and what their baseline is before you immediately throw them into conflict. Speaking of the Daily Planet, I want to see more of that cast because I liked all of them. Wendell Pierce, I think, makes a great Perry White from what we see of him. Cat Grant and Steve Lombard were great matches for their comic book characters. I was a fan, actually, of Beck Bennett's when he was on Saturday Night Live, and I thought that he was funny in every scene that he was in. And who knew that Jimmy Olsen had such game? It seemed like he could get any woman that he wanted. I did find it a bit too convenient that the key to finding Superman was solved instantly by him texting Eve, who just said, oh yeah, he's in a pocket universe. And Eve, I thought, was a bit of a one-dimensional crazy ex-girlfriend. But Jimmy and the whole Daily Planet crew, I thought were really strong supporting characters. I would have liked to have seen more of them in this movie. But I like that Jimmy Olsen also wasn't just this kind of dorky guy in a bow tie running around with the camera. They did change his character, and I think this is a way that you can change the traditional characterization of somebody for the better. He was more well-rounded, and I think that, and I hope that he's going to play more of a part in the movies going forward. I guess there are rumors now that maybe there's going to be a Jimmy Olsen TV show. I would much rather that be an ensemble show set at the Daily Planet using that cast, because I think that that could be a really trademark James Gunn show on HBO Max where you're leaning into the comedy element and it actually makes sense for those characters. As far as the other supporting characters, Ultraman, I think, was an interesting idea. I wonder if they're setting him up potentially to come back as Bizarro. A Superman clone is a pretty strong villain idea, even if it does play into the whole superhero fights a version of himself trope. That trope predates James Gunn by a lot. But at the end of the day, I felt like he was used as basically a super-powered henchman. I felt basically the same about the engineer. Maria Gabriela de Faria was good, but I don't think she got much to do besides just fight Superman. These are strong supporting villains, but I think more could have been done with them. And I feel similarly about Metamorpho. I mean, he literally just gets thrown into the plot and is a main character by the end of the movie. But the most I can tell you about him is that he loves his baby. I mean, other than as a function of the movie to keep Superman temporarily weak in prison, I don't think that he added that much to the movie itself, although I liked Anthony Carrigan's performance. I talked about the Justice Gang's role in general, but as I mentioned in my non-spoiler review, Eddie Gathegi as Mr. Terrific was the standout for me. He was the one who had the most functional role in the plot. And I liked his character, that combination of arrogance and frustration and true heroism. It worked well together. He had an arc in the film. Nathan Fillion was mainly there to be funny, and I think that he was funny. Guy Gardner is a character who is designed to have that edge and to have the wisecracks, etc. Isabella Merced had the least to do as Hawk Girl, but I didn't really have any complaints about how she played that character. And if you were going to say they're going to get their own movie or they're going to appear in this or that spinoff, I wouldn't be necessarily upset about that because my complaints aren't with the characters. They are with the combination of elements in this film. There were also a couple of surprise cameos. Peacemaker pops up on the Metropolis equivalent of Fox News, trashing Superman. Not surprised there. I'm sure we're probably going to see more of that in season 2 later this summer. And we also got a brief appearance from Millie Alcock as Supergirl. Now, I haven't read Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, so I don't know how she's portrayed in the source material. Drunk party girl who says later bitch to Superman is not what I expected for the character. I'm not saying that's good or bad, but it does adjust my expectations for what that Supergirl movie is going to be. But it could be a very good energy match with Jason Momoa as Lobo. And, you know, Supergirl has a much more complicated history with Krypton than Superman does. With this movie, I feel like, as with all movies, you're going to take away something different depending on what you want going in. I think if you go in looking for that more traditional version of Superman, the positivity, the heroism, the icon, that comic book brought to life feel, I completely understand loving the movie because James Gunn delivers on those elements. And I liked a lot of that too. What I needed, though, was just a bit more from the story. I think in this case, it wasn't just that the story was weak necessarily. It actually was very strong in a lot of places. It's that I felt it was overstuffed and things were conflicted and you underdeveloped some parts, overdeveloped some parts. James Gunn has always been one of those throw the kitchen sink and everything else at it kind of director and writer. But I think that that can be a strength and sometimes a weakness. I felt it was a weakness for him in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I thought that that was overstuffed with some things that didn't need to be in there. And I thought that this movie had similar weaknesses. So overall, really on second viewing, Superman was still a mixed bag for me. Sometimes the highlights will stand out more on second viewing in a mixed bag. Sometimes the flaws stand out more. For me, the flaws were still the things that stood out. But Superman is not a terrible movie by any means. I see so many worse movies on a regular basis than Superman. And that's specifically why not a fan is an option on my rating scale. That rating is really meant to indicate that I don't think that a movie is bad. I'm not saying stay away, which is the bottom level. It's really just me saying, hey, I'm not a fan of that movie, but many others might be. And I found often that the movies that I rank as not a fan are the most controversial or divisive, or the ones that people say that they enjoy a lot more than I do. But, you know, I don't think that my role as a critic or any critic's role is to find the audience consensus and to reflect that as the correct opinion. We're all really just out here sharing our own opinions, and I'm sure that somebody could come back at me for every point that I made and rebut it with their own point about why they don't think that is a flaw in the movie. And that's discourse, that's discussion. And I think that that means that you've made, at the very least, an interesting movie. James Gunn made an interesting Superman movie. He made a Superman movie that I thought was still good in many parts. Even the parts that disappointed me, I don't think were badly made. I thought that the characters were well drawn. It's just those combination of elements didn't quite work for me. But I am glad that they're working for other people. I always say when somebody says, oh, I liked this movie, I had a really good time with it, I'm legitimately happy for you. And I want to know what you thought about Superman now that everybody can see it. Have you seen it in theaters? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Do you share some of my concerns? Do you disagree with my concerns? Let me know down in the comments below, and stay tuned right here on the channel, because after the weekend is done, I will be back here on Charts with Dan to look at the opening weekend box office of Superman. How did the public react? How many people actually paid good money to go see it in theaters? I'll break down all of those numbers in context of the other Superman films and a lot more. As always, thank you for watching this video. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, we are so close to 200,000 subscribers. We're about 400, 350 subscribers away. I would love to be able to hit that mark next week. And also, if you're already subscribed, hit that bell so you're notified when I upload a new video. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.